All right, everybody. This is a first for the show after we're in the fourth season. And I've got my first guest who's come on for the third time, and you're going to find out why. My guest today is Steve Drum. So for those of you who've listened previously, season 1, and Steve, I think season 3, but maybe season 2, this is your third time around, so it must not have been a terrible experience for you. So let me introduce Steve. Steve is a friend of mine. He's somebody that I met through a program, and we've just become buds over the time. But now let me give you the professional bio. Steve is a retired Navy SEAL Master Chief. He served 27 years. Thank you for your service. He was the co-creator of the Navy's Warrior Toughness program. And I'm so excited that you're back because he is a published author of the brand new book, Life on the X, a Navy SEAL's guide to meeting any challenge with courage, confidence, and readiness. Steve, it's awesome to have you back. And how fun is it that last time you were on, we talked about you writing a book, and you've written a book, and it's out, and people can buy it right now.
That's right. It seems like it's taken forever, right? I was in the, right as COVID was hitting. That's when I started thinking about, that's when I started putting it into play. And it's been a long process, but for sure, I'm so glad that it's kind of out now that I can see it up on Amazon and other places. So, I mean,
Yeah. I'm really excited for you. I just have so much admiration for anybody who ever writes a book. It is just not my cup of tea.
Not mine either. I promise you.
Steve's like, yeah, I feel you, man. That's really good. So, Steve, before we talk about like Life on the X, why you wrote the book, let's talk a little bit about your background and what led you to the Navy, and just a little bit about your career. And share what you can. Obviously, there's a lot of things you can't share with us, but yeah, what do you want people to know about you in terms of your non-civilian life?
Yeah, no, I think you go back to my childhood, and I talk about this is I always identified with the military in some way, shape, or form. That kind of evolved over the years as to actually what led me to kind of enlisting into the Navy at 18 years old. But I always fashioned myself as wanting to do some kind of commando stuff, right? Doing, all the Army Green Berets in Vietnam were like my heroes. And then I kind of found out, well, there's these things called Navy SEALs, and they're like special forces, but they're for the Navy. And I decided, well, if I do that, I can go to probably arguably the most difficult selection assessment process. So if I make it through, I've really said something about myself. And the nice thing about the Navy at the time was if you wanted to be Army Special Forces, you had to kind of go in and you had to be in there for a few years. But if you wanted to go through the SEAL program, you could do it right off the street, go through boot camp, go through like a small school, and then actually show up to SEAL training. And I like that. Even though that's not exactly how things worked out for me in the end, I basically was I was so bad at math that I failed to qualify for SEAL training. And I was also doubly dumb for believing the recruiter when he said he'd waiver they'll waiver those few points. So I show up, long story short, showed up, worked on submarines for 2 years in Connecticut, and then went out to SEAL training. But yeah, I mean, that was it. And I think it's important that people just know, I've been incredibly fortunate to serve with some of the finest people, in my opinion, on the planet. And I've had great experiences. And so I think I'm just a normal person. I think, there's nothing, remarkable, incredibly remarkable about the things that we possess, and other than kind of our drive and just how hard we prepare and train for the moments that, are critical to us.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, Steve. You say there's nothing really special except for also the millions of dollars of investment in your training, and at least what pop culture says, that people in Navy SEALs or Army Rangers, like significant investment in the various levels of training you have over a whole bunch of different disciplines.
Well, and that's exactly right. I was kind of referring, and you're right about that for sure. I think I kind of just referred to the fact that, we're just, a lot of people, there's mythology in terms of people in special operations, like some kind of, incredible humans, superhumans, whatever. And it's just normal people that are incredibly driven and committed and willing to do whatever it takes. And competitive is obviously huge, doing whatever it takes to kind of accomplish the job. And that's really what it's about. And that includes, and that benefits, the benefits of that are the millions and millions of dollars poured into our training and preparation.
Yeah. So what, as a Navy SEAL, let's talk a little bit more about, just give a little more education here, whatever you can share. As a Navy SEAL, you go through the process, you go to San Diego, you go through the Navy SEAL, for what was BUDS? Is that what that
BUDS.
school is called?
Yep.
Yeah.
Stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, 6-month program.
Yeah. I've read, I think they talk about it in Lone Survivor. I was like, that sounds intense.
Yeah.
And you graduate that, and then from there, do you specialize?
Yeah. So how it worked back in the day, and it's a different training pipeline now, but back then when I went, I showed up in 1995, graduated winter of 1996. Fortunate, I was able to make it through the first time. Didn't get rolled, didn't get dropped, which, a lot of people do. It just, worked out. My body held up. But from there, we would go to just pack all our stuff up and drive cross country to Fort Benning, Georgia, where we would do airborne school. Basically, it's a 3-week training with the Army that should take about 3 days, but they like to extend it out with all that silliness. And from there, we would go to, your respective coasts, which, typically East Coast, back to Coronado or to Virginia Beach, where I was stationed. And so from there, you wait around and you class up into what was called SEAL tactical training at the time, which is basically like a 6-month training that bridges the gap between the very, very basic things that you learn at BUDS and the much higher level things that you learn when you join a SEAL platoon. Yeah.
And then in a SEAL platoon, you've got your team, and then that's it, which is a little bit different than the military. Like, you're basically, that team is the small team that you are with.
Yeah, and it's confusing. It's confusing. The structure really is, if you think of a SEAL team as a squadron, like if you military. So each SEAL team, and they change kind of the construct. Each SEAL team typically has 3 operational troops, and a troop is comprised of either 2 to 3 platoons. And so when I was in a SEAL troop, it was, we averaged between like 40, 50 people. And then as you deploy, you take on more people that are in your troop that are enablers, things like that help you do your job. The people with the electronic widgets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Nice. So 27 years. What does it mean to be a Master Chief? What does that mean for the common people?
Most people think Master Chief. The only reason they've heard that is because their children played Halo, right? So the character.
I was going to say yes,
So most people are familiar with that. And the reason I introduce myself, and I'm not one of those guys that's like all wrapped up in a title, but one of the reasons is when people think of military leaders, they automatically assume, generals, admirals, colonels, captains, all majors, all that kind of stuff. And really what they don't realize is just how significant, especially in the Navy, especially in military special operations, just how significant a role that senior enlisted play as leaders, right? So as an example, as a senior enlisted leader, when I was a troop chief, I was an E8, I was a senior chief petty officer. And so my job was to basically work underneath a troop commander. And so it's my job to make sure that I'm running tactics, I'm running training, and even on full-size troopettes, I'm managing the battlefield, right? In terms of I'm managing the tactics. And then the troop commander is overall in command of everything that happens on that battlefield. And they're, the big picture. But it's my job to make sure that I'm running the tactical maneuver elements, like who goes where, who does what when it comes to fighting the enemy. And that kind of translates up to the highest levels of leadership. So I never achieved this title, but Command Master Chief, or in the Army, it'd be Command Sergeant Major, you are basically the right-hand man or woman of that commander. So you think of like an admiral or a general, the person they go to is that senior enlisted leader, because those are the ones that can really inform that commander and advise them on all the policies and actions they take, how that's going to affect the people and the mission on the ground. And so I think that I say all that because it's really important that people know that senior enlisted leadership model. And I always kind of often tell, executive leaders, hey, there's something to be learned from attempting to replicate that model, where you take people that will never be necessarily executive leaders, executive officers, but you could take them and bring them up to advise you at those very high levels.
Yeah. And there's value in that outside of like you said, the education that comes with what's called a non-commissioned officer, right? With somebody that's right, that comes in out of college or comes out of the Naval Academy and comes in as some sort of officer by education, not by experience in the field necessarily.
And that's right. And I will say this, today, more than half of all SEAL candidates have a college degree. So even though they enlist, they're educated, they're smart, right? And they're doing this, they're joining the military to specifically do this job. Yeah.
Well, let's talk for a couple of minutes about we mentioned in your intro, the Navy's Warrior Toughness program. And, full disclosure, what I'm doing is I'm kind of building the foundation to talk about why about the book, what it means, because I want to make sure that people understand your background so that we can talk about why you had to write this book, why it's important for you to do this. So the Navy Warrior Toughness Program, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was basically the last job I had in the Navy. I was transferred from Virginia Beach, where I spent almost my entire career, and transferred up to the Navy's boot camp in Great Lakes. And my initial job was to kind of oversee the program that onboarded young men and women into the Navy at Navy's boot camp that had contracts for SEAL, diver, air rescue swimmer, the specialized program. While I was there, I basically was approached, and the story I always like to tell is myself, a clinical psychologist, and a chaplain were kind of locked into a room and told by this admiral, you three need to figure out how to make our sailors tougher. And we're like, well, what? How do we do that?
Wait, hold on. A clinical psychologist, you and the naval chaplain?
Yes.
I like this person who puts you in a room. I'm like, this is a good combination. This is like a joke. This is great.
It's 100%. And everybody's thinking, oh, that sounds like a joke. And I'm like, man, we need to get somebody. We never got around to writing a punchline for that joke.
That'd be so good.
Yeah. But the reason is you're really approaching things from mind, body, soul. And so my initial reason for being on the team was like, hey, you've got a chaplain, you've got a psychologist. Well, your average maybe enlisted person, they may not relate to those type of people, but bring a SEAL in who knows what it's like to perform and train for combat, things like that. He ought to know what he's talking about. And so, but what we all realized is we all kind of had there was a lot of overlap. There was a lot of similarities with how we approached the problem of solving toughness. And the first thing we had to do was define it. We defined it as being able to take a hit and keep going, whether that's an actual physical wound or you're on a ship and a missile hits and your friends are injured. It's like get back up into the fight. But also everything has to translate to the other elements and aspects of your life, right? So you have to take a hit in your personal life, right? A loss of a relationship, maybe you didn't get that promotion, and you got to keep moving forward. Two, you got to be able to perform under pressure, right? When the pressure's on, when bullets are flying, or when you just have up on a deadline, or maybe in civilian world, you got a presentation, you got a pitch to the C-suite. It's like, hey, you gotta be able to calm yourself, and you gotta be able to execute what you practiced in the clutch when it's difficult. And lastly, in the SEAL teams, we would go on often high tempo deployments. You think 3 to 6 months of deployments, you're going out on multiple hits. You accumulate a lot of kind of emotional, mental, and physical fatigue. And so it's like, hey,
sure,
you got to stay locked in. And then the other aspect is, you may have a sailor on a ship somewhere staring at a radar screen. Right, 99% of the time, there's nothing going on. But if they get complacent and they tune out, then ships can crash, people can die. So it's critical that you're able to kind of deal with that day in, day out grind and stay focused and engaged.
Yeah, awesome, Steve. So let's talk about the book, Life on the X. I want to start, and I've been curious about this. What does Life on the X mean?
It's funny. I like telling this story, right? My mother, bless her, one of my, he keeps me in line, right? Keeps me grounded. She's like, life on the X. Nobody's going to know what that means. So fortunately I can come on podcast and unpack it a little bit. And so
hold on a minute. What you're saying is your mother's prepared you for the PR tour for this book. That's a great mom. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Always there to support. Right. But really the X comes from my time in the military. And so if you think of the X, it's a military doctrine term, but you can think of it almost as X marks the spot. Right. So for example, if we drive up to the objective and pile out of our armored vehicles and hit the door, right, or if we fast drop out of a helicopter, we refer to that as the X, right? We're landing right there. It's that convergence of everything. And we also use it, though, in a different context slightly, and that is if we get ambushed, right? If we are patrolling down the street in an urban setting and we are in that kill zone, we refer to that as the X as well. In that case, we got to maneuver. Okay. We got to get off that X, but that X represents that most dangerous, that most critical part of a combat operation, right? And that's what we gear our training to. You gear your training and preparation to the most difficult, the most dangerous. And so the translation here is that we have, all of us, in some way, shape, or form, have that in our own lives, right? Maybe it's professionally, maybe it's personally, and it's everywhere from, again, that big presentation. It's you're waiting to have a sales call with a client, with a customer that you've been waiting to see for 3 months, and you've got to get it right because you may not have another chance. So you show up in that moment, and you show up and you're ready to go. But or maybe it's, hey, your kid just did something really stupid, and you got a call from the high school principal, and as you're driving home, you were going ahead. You're like, all right, what best serves this moment? What best creates the behavioral change? Whatever it is, it's like being intentional and deliberate in advance of your important moments.
Yeah. Like, okay. Yeah. I'm like, I'm thinking about my former career and what I do now more for clients and their exes, where they bring in the exes, we talk about them, and it's very high stakes. It's not life and death, but a lot of these things people are dealing with is very high stakes. And I don't know this to be true, and correct me if it's not, but what I hear about the life and the ex is, how do you prepare yourself mentally, physically, emotionally? How do you do your very best to prepare for it so that when the shit goes down, because what is almost 100% certainty, it's not going to go the way you specifically exactly trained for it, that you know what to do. It'd be a sales call, whether it be that like tough conversation with your kids, whether it be in a kill zone in a military operation. Like I forget what it said. Like, what's this thing in the military you plan so that you can improvise? Like whatever that saying is, because like it never goes there's no way to predict how it's actually going to go.
No, and that's right. Now you cut no corners, you spare no expense, right, so to speak. You don't wing it when you go into these situations. Right. And so you do everything methodically to make sure that you're ready. You have your ducks in a row, right? The knowledge you've gained, the skills you developed, you show up in that moment and you're ready to go. But with that comes the acceptance that life often has other plans for us. And so part of the thing that I talk about and some of the mental skills is self-talk, is what we have in sports psychology or performance psychology known as a performance mantra, performance statement. And that's the self-talk that goes through. Right. And so for me, I'll go back to my first time in combat, being shot at on a rooftop in Iraq. And I catch myself thinking, oh, no, this isn't good. We're taking heavy fire. And I start thinking about the what ifs. Right. You start when the stress is high. Often the thoughts that populate your head are not ones that serve you, are ones that divert your focus and attention away from where they need to be. And so in that moment, I remember thinking the three things that every Navy SEAL knows when it comes to being in a gunfight: shoot, move, communicate. And that's my cue. It's my reminder to snap my focus and attention back on what matters. These are just obvious things. So it's the same thing. Maybe you're nervous, your hands are sweating, your heart's racing before you walk onto your X, whatever that looks like. And you just remind yourself, because you're a professional, you've done this to prepare, this, the team has worked on this, whatever it is, you tell yourself that. And then you finish with saying, you know what, maybe today's the day I get thrown a curveball. Good, fine. Because it's my opportunity to demonstrate my agility, my poise, right? And so you always go in there knowing that you have to pivot and adjust, but you go in there not having to worry about the little details because you've taken care of them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So why did you write the book?
Yeah, so as I was getting ready to exit the military, probably even before I got rolled into the Warrior Toughness program, which was like my last 2.5, maybe, close to 3 years. I extended a little bit to help build the program further. But I'm looking out and I'm like, all right, well, what do I want to do? I don't know what I want to do necessarily. All right, so let me reflect back on what the most meaningful elements and aspects of my career were. And, I enjoyed operating. I enjoyed training for combat. I enjoyed, going overseas into a combat environment. I did. But if I look back, I'm like, all right, what was my biggest contribution to the military? And I have to say that it wasn't taking certain bad guys off the battlefield, as sexy as that might be to say, but it was more about me training other people. And whether that was being in an instructor capacity, whether it's going overseas and training foreign special operations partner forces, or me in the Warrior Toughness program. It's like being able to distill experiences down, take my experiences and effectively translate them to help other people in whatever that environment or whatever that profession is. And that's really why I wrote the book.
Yeah. Let's talk about the process of writing a book. For those who are, this is not a video podcast. The look on Steve's face was, I got some stuff to say here. And then I want to come back to like some of the contents of the book,
right?
Like the format. But I'm curious, this, I work with some authors. I don't help them write books. That is not my thing, but we do some of the branding. I do some of the branding work for them. I'm curious, what did you learn through the process of writing your first book that you didn't know before writing your first book?
I will I will tell you this, there's a big arc there, and I will start with the fact that I was like, oh, my speaking it's like right before COVID, I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to have so many. I'm going to hire a ghostwriter because I don't want to write this thing myself. Are you kidding me? Knuckle dragger that I am. I'm going to hire a ghostwriter, and then the speaking kind of dried up, and I realized what ghostwriters charge, and then I also realized at the end of the day, I'm going to be doing so much heavy lifting, even with a ghostwriter, that I might as well just write the darn thing myself. And so that's what I did. And one of the things that I took for granted that I regret, and it is really, really, really nailing down the table of contents. That sounds so elementary and basic. The problem is I have so much of the content, but you have to make sure that it's balanced, right? You can't have a section of the book, right? You can't have a chapter that's this long and then another chapter that's this long. It's like, so had I been a lot more methodical about just being, I did a table of contents, but I needed to be more precise with it. And that's what I would do the next time. That's the advice I would give to people. Do not underestimate just the need for a very precise table of contents.
That's the first time I've heard that. That's really interesting. Yeah, because it would be weird, right? If you open up a book and you look at the table of contents, like the first chapter is like 30 pages and the second chapter is 5 pages, that would be, for most people, that'd be a little bit of a strange experience.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And so I had to trim down a lot of content because it was too much, and then it's going to outweigh the other areas in the book. So,
yeah. So let's talk about the contents of the book. What can people expect to get from it, and what was your thought process as you're writing it in terms of what you wanted to make sure was in there? And I hear there's a bunch of lessons. What do you want us as the audience to get out of your book?
Yeah. And so I think a lot of the books written by a lot of my contemporaries and other people in the military are kind of that biography piece. And, and that's great, right? That's just not the path. That's not the path I elected to take. Mine is, it has my stories in there because I feel like, you have to have that because people expect that. And that's the credibility piece. But what was really important to me is that I take a book and I make it prescriptive in nature. Like, I don't want you to just have a bunch of ideas. I want you to actually have the opportunity to work through some of those ideas. And so there's a little workbook element of it. So at the end of each chapter or section, there is some little exercises for you to do. There's some things for you to write out. So you can kind of basically translate what the content that you've read, how it applies to you. So one of the things about writing the book is it's not just about Navy SEALs. It's about really finding some of the common threads that all high performers use. And so I interviewed a bunch of former professional athletes, Olympians, really high-level business leaders, and other military people. And I use other stories and entrepreneurs just to say, hey, these specific elements are what the highest performers do. Here's how we can take it and translate it, distill it down for you to use, for you to benefit from that wisdom and experience.
Yeah, nice. I like that, the actionable, because, it's interesting. I've read quite a few books, like biographies or military books, and you have kind of like the lone survivor type of thing that's like more some education on what the process is, but then like a story, like a real life story. And then you have kind of the big ideas, but yours is a very actionable, hey, here's at the end of this chapter, here's 3 things you can do to work on your mental toughness or work on your emotional toughness.
That's right.
I love that.
And we all love reading good, entertaining stories. And I have some of that in there. I have what I consider to be some good, entertaining stories, but that's not the primary reason. I wanted to write a business / self-improvement book. But that was kind of the motivation behind it.
Yeah. And now as we start to wrap up, I'm going to ask you the question that I've been waiting to ask you. And you know me well enough to know this is going to be a little bit of a joke, but not totally. How did everything you did in your entire career prepare you to be the father of boys playing hockey in high school?
Oh, man. I don't know. I think
it didn't. You're like, nothing can prepare you for that.
No, it's funny how, it's an interesting journey. I still maintain, I never got to play the sport myself. I played soccer and I was pretty mediocre at it at best. But I maintain, I have a daughter and now I love watching her play. She plays soccer. She does volleyball. She does basketball. And my son's more of a one-trick pony. He played lacrosse for a little bit, but now he's kind of just finishing up his hockey career. When he goes in, he's going to play his last year probably of hockey, his senior year. And it's competitive. It's a very competitive league that they're in Illinois hockey, high school hockey. But, it's like you see the kids and you're like, my parents were not involved at all in sports for me. And so maybe I tended to maybe overcompensate with that by pushing them maybe a little bit too hard in that, right? And then as you like mature out of that a little bit, right? You grow and evolve as a father or a parent. You realize, hey, like, what are we doing here? Let's make sure that everything they're doing is either fun or it's capturing a lesson that's going to serve them later in life, and that sometimes is just being on a team. It's just, being supportive to the people in a room with you, it's that type of the life lessons. And of course, it's kind of mandatory that my kids play sports because they are going to do that no matter what it is, whether they like it or not, they're going to play sports. But that's kind of it. I know that was kind of a meandering answer to your question, but
that was good. That actually spurred another question for those of us out here who have children. I think life on the X is a very apropos, like, as a parent of now your children a little bit older, mine are younger. It's very unexpected things happen. So I'm asking for myself, and if you've had any lessons around this, how do you take the lessons from the book and all of the things that you've done, the mental toughness and the emotional toughness, and how do you deal with like transferring those lessons to your children without being it like you have to be the same as me? Because the value of these things in the real world, and then you also have kids that are going through puberty and hormonal, and I don't know exactly what the dynamic is, but I'm super curious as a parent. How do you maintain the balance of like, hey, I got these really powerful lessons I didn't know are going to serve you, and at the same time, kids don't like being told what to do. At least my 7-year-old doesn't. So how have you and your wife balanced that?
Yeah, I will just rewind a little bit because I think it's an important point to make. Is there are a lot of skills, there were mental skills that I learned in the SEAL teams that I think helped me throughout the difficult areas of my career. But these things I learned intuitively. Nobody taught me these things. And the problem with that is then you don't really kind of learn. I don't know if science is the right word behind that, but you don't really learn the broader application. So while you may have it together, you're like, all right, we're fast roping out of a helicopter. We're getting ready to hit a target. We're getting shot at. Okay, got it. Here I go. I align my training. But then all of a sudden you may find yourself back home and the slightest little thing sets you off and you just don't find yourself prepared. And so when I created the Warrior Toughness when I helped create it, right? I helped create the Warrior Toughness program. One of the things that was really, really important to me was that you teach this in a manner that you can apply consistently across the whole spectrum of challenge you face, both in your professional and your personal life. So without that, we're not really setting people up to succeed because the better you are in one area, the more effective you're going to be in the other area. It's going to bring up both games. And so I think, though, when, and I definitely tried to impart these things on my son. And here's the thing, you don't always know. Like when you're dealing, especially with an adolescent, the puberty hits, you don't know what they're listening to, right? You don't know what they're absorbing. And so I'd like to think that a lot of the things that I've done, I've kind of taken a more measured approach as I evolved as a parent to say, hey, these are things that I want you to think about, like, right. But it is difficult when it's your own children. Like you have friends that are like, I have friends that are psychologists. They don't if their kids are struggling, they don't give them that. They send them to somewhere else. I think it's important that you just understand and support and get them. Like if there's issues, you recognize and marshal the right resources to help solve that.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, Steve, I just want to, somebody, we've known each other for a few years now, third time guest on the show. I want to congratulate you.
Hey, thanks.
On getting the book out, man. Like I don't know the nitty gritty of writing a book, but I know it's a lot of work. And just really congratulations. I can't wait to read it, order it, and hope everybody who's listening orders it as well, because I'm sure it's going to be awesome. I was just telling Steve, if you go to Amazon, the artwork is like perfect for your brand too. I just love
thanks.
The artwork of it. You did a good job. Well, let's talk as we wrap up here. You're also getting into the tech world. as well.
Yeah, I don't know. That maybe is a stretch to say I'm getting into
here comes Steve's humbleness coming out.
No, I was asked to collaborate with on an app. There's, I think we recognize that for men, there are a lot of challenges to emotional health and emotional well-being in terms of kind of how men are kind of maybe taught to process certain things. And a lot of the things in terms of whether you're talking about mindfulness training, whether you're talking about, just mental health, a lot of it just seems to be geared more towards women in many cases. And so I was approached by a couple of guys and they're like, hey, mental health in men, suicide rates, depression, it's through the roof right now. Let's do something that's targeted specifically to that. And so they created these guys. A couple of them are from developers from the Calm mindfulness app. And so it's a startup. It's backed by a couple of people, including Apollo Ono, the incredibly decorated speed skater. And so my contribution, believe it or not, was to teach the things that a lot of them are in the book, to teach these things. But here's the thing, in a cold shower setting, believe it or not. So
wait, what?
Yes. You're like, what? So basically the premise is, so we take this very serious topic of mental health, but we also don't take ourselves too seriously. We want it to be fun. There's things that we want to be funny. But here's the thing. If you want to perform under stress, you have to have an element of training under stress, right? That's what we do in the military, right? You try to stress yourself as much when you're training so you can kind of have that adaptation more so when you're actually under stress. So one easy way to do that is with cold water. So not only are they incredibly beneficial in terms of physiologically, in terms of hormones, in terms of dopamine levels that are extended throughout the day, you are actually injecting very thoughtful and intentional stress and learning these things under stress so you can better apply them later. And so it's very progressive in terms, but it was a lot of fun. It's called the Mental app, and it's kind of still in its infancy, its beta stages, but it's available to check out now. But
that's great. So for anybody who wants to listen to the silky smooth tones of Steve Drum while taking a cold shower, that's great. No, that's fun. We hadn't talked about the cold shower part. That's so interesting. Yeah. So it's because, I hate cold showers for that exact reason, because it's like introduce stress, and I know it's good for you, but I really like that because it's helping you to, again, build the mental and I guess physical fortitude in a way that isn't actually dangerous.
No,
but your body,
that everybody can do. And
that everybody can do.
Here's the thing. For the first part of it, is 15 seconds of cold water. The first part,
so it's
15
not like,
seconds, right? So it's like, hey, we're ramping up, right? So it is really approachable and doable for anybody.
Yeah, that's super cool. How did they find you?
I think they just they probably heard, I think they heard me on some podcasts. And so, and they screened me.
That's cool. They screened you. Last thing, Steve, we didn't talk about this. You are an author. You're also a very accomplished speaker. So let's talk for a minute about what you've been up to. I know pandemic for all speakers was an interesting thing, but you are a speaker. I see your stuff you put on LinkedIn all the time. You're out speaking. What kind of things do you speak on, and who do you like to speak to?
Yeah, and so it's funny, the best thing you can do as a speaker for those out there is, and we've all heard this, if you're a professional speaker, you realize you want to dial down your niche, right? But sometimes there's opportunities that you hadn't considered that come your way. I'd say what I like to do is basically, just like the book, it's the same things. I wrote the book, or it's closely aligned to the things that I speak of. It's like, hey, here's what the top people in the world do to plan, prepare, execute, and learn, and then repeat. Here's what the top people in the world do to be successful. And so here's how you can do it. And so I think a lot of it's leadership, and it's sales is another big one, and finance. People that are like, hey, I have to go do this very specific thing at this moment, right? Maybe I'm a new leader, leading a new team for the first time. It's like, okay, what do I need to do? So I show up as my first introductory session with the team to make sure that I have credibility, that I make sure that I come across as somebody who's going to be an effective leader for that team. Or I'm in front of that client, that customer, and it's like, hey, I got the pressure to meet my numbers, right? Maybe my job is on the line, my reputation's on the line. All right, so it's that type of thing that I like to speak of. It's that performance under pressure. It's mental toughness. It's really learning and reflecting, gathering lessons learned for constant process improvement.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Virtual.
I love doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you kill it, man. You're a great, amazing speaker. I've seen you speak a number of times. In person, virtual, you're open. You're out there doing your thing.
That's right.
Steve, Thanks for coming back for the third time.
Man, it seemed like this whole thing took 5 minutes. It was.
I know it's so
fun
that
every time
easy.
I come on with you.
Well, yeah, it's like the first time we did this, I think we did it at night over some whiskey, and I think we went for about an hour and 45. It's 10:50 Eastern time, so I'm like, and I got to do some driving today, so I'm like, yeah, I mean, we'll keep this one alcohol free this time.
Yeah. I think you were in a broom closet too when we were. Your first one.
That probably sounds right. So, Steve, we're gonna put a link to your book, put a link to the app, link to your website, all that stuff in there. This is gonna be an awesome episode. I know, like, your episodes have crushed it before. Everybody, go check out Steve. Steve, man, again, super proud of you. Thanks for being on once again, and best of luck with just having the book out there and seeing where that takes you and takes your career. It's really exciting.
Hey, thanks, Jason. I really appreciate that. And you have a good weekend and safe travels, brother.
Thanks, brother.